He gave a low whistle as though impressed. Theoe, you're tough. Now that didn't need dignifying with a response. Since you want to be all mysterious and silent again, does that mean I win? What? Well, you couldn't back up your claim. There's no such thing as a calm, collected romance. It's all madness. So I'm right. Love leads to madness and we all end up blissfully wretched. Oh, for the love of. Oh, there's the nose wrinkle. He grinned. Baan very deliberately looked him in the eyes and sighed. He was just so impossibly. Baan dropped her stitching and stood up abruptly. Something was wrong. Baan did not normally listen for the souls of animals because there were simply too many. There were always bugs or mice or birds somewhere, and listening too closely led to distraction and sometimes madness. But now she strained herself to listen. Their usual chatter had gone nearly silent, and the souls she could hear were getting further away. Either they were burrowing beneath the sand, or they were fleeing into the rocks, or even flying far, far away. They were running. Something was coming. Baan? She didn't answer. She darted to the courtyard and looked. The sky had darkened and she could see clouds rapidly forming overhead. She could not see past the cliffs, but even in her sheltered box canyon she could see the sand picking up and begin to swirl in little eddies. Baan had dwelt in the desert her entire life. She knew that a monster was growing beyond the rock wall and it would bring its fury down on them soon. Oh, that looks bad. She turned her head. Lucios was standing in the doorway, eyes fixed on the sky. He was hunched over, and she knew he'd strained something. Rushing to the door, she hurried over to him and swung his arm over her shoulders. As she passed through the doorway, she grabbed the walking stick leaning against the wall just beside it, handing it to him. Lucios, go to Bir-Vuti. Stay away from Hole. She dashed to her clothes chest and grabbed a long strip of cloth and gave it to him. Tie around nose, mouth. She indicated with quick motions how the fabric should be tied. Wait, Baan. Go. I follow soon. Baan turned and began to seal the doorway. It had never been fitted with a door. Baan simply left it open in the day and closed it when she left with a leather tarp that she tied down around notches in the frame. It would not keep the sand out completely, but it would be better than nothing. The only problem was that the rolled-up leather was heavy, and she fell backwards from the weight. Here, Lucios began to help her tie it down. No, Lucios, go to Bir-Vuti. You too slow. Sand very dangerous. I will run very fast. Baan didn't think he knew what sand in the lungs could do, how fast it could happen. Sometimes animals drowned while standing. Let's split up. I'll tie this down here and you can do the one up top. He pointed to the open roof. Baan hesitated. It was a good idea. They did not have much time and she heard thunderboom close by. Yes. Be quick. Go to Bir-Vuti right after. Right after. Understand? Yeah. I got it. Go. She dashed up the stairs. Lucios barked. Keep your hand on the wall. You'll fall. Baan would have smiled if she wasn't panting already. It wasn't a bad suggestion, but Baan didn't think she had the time. The wind was already howling, slapping her bare face like a leather strap. Sand and dirt flew through the air and Baan groped for the tarp with her face turned away. Her bun came loose, then fell away entirely as she maneuvered away from the sheltered opening to tie the first corner down. The wind was very, very strong. The strap flew away from her fingers and she had to find the corner again. Her hair was blowing into her face, slapping her cheeks, and she knew it had been a mistake to come up without a cloth over her nose and mouth. The wind rose into a shriek and Baan cried out as it tipped her over and she fell, fingers scrabbling for purchase on loose dirt and sand. She tumbled across the plateau, completely disoriented. No, she was going to fall. She was going to fall. She needed to. Got you. Lucios's grip on her ankle was unbreakable. His fingers were steel as he hauled her back to the entrance with a grunt. Baan sat up, shielding her face in the crook of her elbow as she shimmied to the first corner, keeping low to the ground. There was something wrong with the way he was breathing. It was clear he had dashed up the stairs. Had he? One crisis at a time. She focused on the strap and tied it down, then moved to the next one. Lucios held the corner down as she worked, shielding her from the wind with his body. She patted him and pointed back to the platform in her not-vuti and he obediently dropped back inside. She followed him, pulling the last outer strap behind her. She tied it down, then quickly moved to the inner straps, making the tarp as secure as possible. The leather vibrated like the membrane of a drum and sand leaked in through the sides. Better than nothing. She wasn't sure it would hold, but with the flat way it was lying the wind was unlikely to tear it up and away. There were always little storms in the desert, but this one had a kind of fury she had not seen for many years. Thunder boomed again, but it was a dry sound. The air crackled with electricity without rain and Baan knew what kind of storm this would be. It would be best if they moved to the Bir-Vuti immediately. Lucios, lean. She put his arm around her shoulders as she guided them down the stairs with her hand on the wall. His steps were unsteady and his breathing was uneven. Vaughn worried he would tumble off the steps. He was far too heavy to hold onto if he did so. Do not fall, Lucios. You are heavy. We will. Yeah, if I fall, let go. No reason, he grunted, wincing, for us both to splatter on the floor. No, do not fall. Very simple. He snorted then gasped in pain. He fell silent, as though the effort of speaking was too much to keep up while walking. This was likely true. He did not sound well. They made it to the ground without dying. This was good. Lucios, on the other hand, was not good. He was leaning heavily on the walking stick, likely to avoid putting all his weight on her, and they made their way slowly into the cave. Vaughn helped him lie down, cursing silently at how flat-footed the storm had caught her. She should have noticed sooner. She had allowed herself to become distracted. It would not happen again. The floor was very hard. It would not be comfortable, and Vaughn needed her medical tools if she was going to help him. Lucios lay with his eyes closed, breathing heavily and unsteadily. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and when she brushed his hair off his forehead, she could feel it was cold. Not good. Vaughn, he said, finally, I think I ripped something. Several somethings. He stopped talking and turned his head, making a retching noise as his body stiffened. Nothing came up. Do not move. Usually he would have said something pithy in that tone he had, but he was silent now, struggling to swallow. No, this was very, very bad. Vaughn already had a sense of what had gone wrong. Swiftly, she peeled back his tunic. Dark bruises stared up at her from beneath pale, clammy skin. It was swelling, hard and bloated like a waterskin filled to bursting. She cast around for something, anything, to place under his feet, but there was nothing. She gently pushed the hair off his face, making sure his head stayed turned to the side. Lucios, she said, as calmly as she could. He didn't stir. Do not move. I back soon. She squeezed his hand, relieved when he squeezed back. She scrambled back into the novice. The tarps were vibrating furiously, and sand floated in the air as her clothes flapped in the breeze. Vaughn held her breath as she went to her clothes chest and took out a shawl. She wrapped it around her head and over her nose and mouth. She would be useless to Lucios if she inhaled too much sand. Vaughn grabbed a basket, throwing everything she needed into it. Her surgery kit, all her tinctures and ointments, a basin, a bowl. Why not take the entire cauldron? She could stuff everything inside it and carry it all at once. Yes, the extra cloths, the things for a fire and blanket. He needed a blanket. Vaughn didn't want to waste time on a second trip, so she hauled everything with her the first time, though she staggered under the weight. She ended up dragging the metal cauldron behind her, grateful the metal was thick and hardy as the bottom scraped along the rock floor. There was no time to waste. Vaughn took off her shawl and set it flat on the ground. She put the blanket over Lucios before putting all her tools on her shawl, the empty basket she used to prop his feet up. Lucios was shaking now, unresponsive. The internal bleeding was severe, and anything and everything she did would be risky. Vaughn put her hand on his forehead, listening, though not with her ears. Lucios, she said out loud, but there was no response. Well, that was fine. It would be better this way. Vaughn reached out with her magic and pulled him deeper into sleep. Vaughn needed to open him up again, and this way, he would not wake up halfway. Magic was much more reliable than drugs, at least for this. He would not wake in the middle, and if he died, there would be no pain. Vaughn washed her hands and got to work. The cave smelled bloody. This was expected whenever a surgery was performed. The real problem was that Lucios was still dying. She had stopped him from hemorrhaging, but he had lost too much blood, which was deadly all on its own. It was only a matter of time before his heart failed and his lungs stopped, before his soul, his bright, cheerful soul that had filled her novice with so much music, went silent forever. Vaughn could do many things, but replacing blood lost to an injury was not one of them. She washed her hands, thinking. Even now his blood pressure was far too low, his heart pumping madly in an effort to compensate. If this continued, he would die. There was something she could try. She was not sure if it would work, but there was nothing to lose now. At least if she did something, he would have a chance, however slim. Yes, she would try it, but it would take a great deal of magic and she would need her coat, which meant she had to brave the sand. Vaughn took the cloth she had given to Lucios and wrapped it around her nose and mouth. The trip was quick, but she was still brushing sand and dirt off her hair and clothes when she got back to the bookworm. She stripped and dressed well away from Lucios, making sure to shake out the dirt. Infection control was already going to be a nightmare. No need to make things worse. Once she was ready, she sat behind his head and put her hands on his temples. Touch would make things a bit easier, but still the next part would be remarkably tricky. Vaughn closed her eyes and immersed herself into her soul weaving. He was a fighter. Stubborn, His soul was clinging to his flesh and vibrating, its song frantic and discordant as his organs struggled and began to fail. This would not do. The first thing was to tie his soul down so he would not die until his body stopped working entirely. Sometimes death was like that. The soul fled before the body failed. Sometimes, the body failed but the soul lingered until it frayed and drifted away, and she was sure that in Lukio's case, it would be the latter. If his body did fail, she would have to cut him loose with her magic. She would not suffer him to become one of the Preba, the dead who walked. She anchored him down, deep down, and began to prod. Her idea had been to use her magic to stimulate his own body to produce blood faster. It would be risky but she would temporarily tie him to her so he could pull the energy that would normally come from sustenance from her. Even in theory it was tenuous, and she half wondered if she would manage to kill them both. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Baan had been more than surprised to learn during her time in the Shivuti that blood was made inside the bones. It was wholly counterintuitive, but knowledge of physics had been accumulated by generations of witches who had traded their most precious things for it. There had been no reason to doubt, and as she had become good at weaving, she had begun to see the truth of it. Now she delicately touched the weave in his bones and began to stimulate it with her own. Distantly she was aware she was sweating. If she went too fast, or pushed too hard, he would die. Either his body would cannibalize itself over time or he would overextend his resources and die of exhaustion. Baan could share her energy, but not her physical resources. She could not give him her salts or vital fluids to compensate. Slowly, she had to go slowly and trust he would not die too quickly from shock. Baan went gently, marveling at how clearly she could see. In a way, this would have been impossible if she had still been human. Even a very talented witch could not see, hear, or touch the weave of a soul with such precision and clarity. Such things were the domains of gods, or monsters. Baan shut her eyes and fell into her weaving. Beyond the box canyon the wind continued to howl. An hour passed, then another. Eventually the storm passed over the hidden Nurvuti and died quietly over the desert. In the caves beneath the earth, a woman knelt at the head of a man, still as the stones around her. Sweat trickled from her brow and over her cheek and chin, dripping like tears. The man lay as though dead, his jagged breathing the only sign of life. Eventually, his breathing steadied, color returned to his skin. They continued on like this, long into the night. Baan woke slowly, ravenous for souls. Everything hurt, and her tongue and mouth felt fuzzy. More importantly, she needed the privy. She shifted to sit up and froze. There was a man lying in bed with her. She could feel his heat against her back, his bright, noisy soul. She wanted very badly to reach behind her and eat him. She turned her head and opened her eyes. Morning, Baan, or should I say evening? I don't know. I think it's dark outside though. Surprise, we're alive. Great, right? Lucios grinned at her, his face far too close for comfort. For a moment she was disoriented, until she remembered. Oh, yes, she had crawled in next to him because it had seemed practical at the time. Yes, the fire had died sometime in the night as she fixed him. She had tried to relight the fire but failed. In the end she had taken her coat off and hidden it in one of the unfinished tunnels of the Birvuti, but she had not been able to wear her dress. It had been ruined by his blood. So now she was wearing her shawl, thankfully. It was very long and wide, like an obscenely short chira, tying it over her shoulder and around her waist. Still, it only fell to her mid-thigh, though thankfully it covered all the important bits. Baan had been too tired to do anything else after failing to light a fire except sleep. Well, they had kept each other warm. That was the important part. If anything, he ought to be grateful. He had been the one who'd lost all that blood. Keeping him warm had been a priority. Baan fought to keep from placing her hand on his bare skin. It would be very, very easy to devour him now, but doing so would defeat the purpose of having saved him in the first place. It was her hunger speaking now, the restless, hollow need in her pulling against the threads of her control in mindless desire. She had to get away, quickly, now, even. She sat up. Lucios, do not move. Oh, don't worry, I'm not going anywhere for a while. You have something I can use as a chamber pot, right? I don't think I can stand. Yes, lie still. She stood. Lucios gave a low whistle. Not that I'm complaining, but for the record, where I come from, you'd normally buy me dinner first, you know? She stared at him blankly, momentarily confused, until she suddenly understood his meaning. She burst out laughing, not because it was funny, but because she was relieved. He was making terrible jokes again. Lucios was fine. He would be fine. He stared at her. No way. I finally get a laugh out of you and it's over my worst joke ever. Lucios, if you want laughs, be funnier. Now stop talking. She left to get him something to use as a chamber pot. As she walked away, she heard him mutter to himself, a little sulkily, well, at least she laughed. No, she would not eat him. Not tonight, or any other night. Baan had thought Lucios would struggle through his recovery longer, but he did not. His recovery time was surprisingly quick. He had only been in pain for the first week or so, and then had been able to sit up and walk short distances with only an odd twinge here and there in two. Predictably, he had developed a fever, but she had known infection would be an issue and had plied Poloitisaham on him with and between every meal. It had worked. Baan had taken the bulk of that time to tidy her notvuti and fix whatever had broken. The tarp at the door had torn away, so many of her things had been tossed around and smashed. Fixing what she could and replacing what she couldn't had taken her a great deal of time. The latch on her chest of clothes was permanently broken, and one of the corners had crushed in awkwardly, making it hard to open and close. Otherwise, there were few casualties, aside from her sanity. Lucios, even when he could not sit up or walk, could still run his mouth and did so at every opportunity. Every opportunity. Now he was telling her jokes. Bad ones. Very, very bad ones. Baan made sure to scowl very convincingly each time, but he seemed to take it as a challenge and only redoubled his efforts. She was going to strangle him. And the ass said, "That's my third cousin. Removed. Get it? Lucios, stop." She pressed her fingers over her temples. Dolcoiri humor is not funny. Oh come on, Baan. The one about the temple priest and the Vestal Virgin was pretty funny. It was not. You were smiling. I was not. You were. I saw you. It's okay to laugh, Baan. I won't tell anyone. I promise. Lucios. Baan set the basket of herbs down beside him on the bed and handed him the mortar and pestle. Grind. Do not speak. Ah, fine. Just let me know once you start missing the sound of my voice. I'll tell you about that time I was on campaign along the southern coast. Did you know? Lucios. Grind. Within the first month he had started walking around the courtyard every day, and halfway through the second month he had begun making an even bigger nuisance of himself by sticking his nose everywhere. By the time the wind changed, howling in from the north, he was downright sprightly. No lifting. Lucios grinned at her, cheerfully ignoring her protests as he took her bucket from her and hauled it up to the kitchen. It's fine, this weighs nearly nothing. Lucios no longer limped. Baan did not quite remember how she had done it, but she vaguely recalled fixing anything and everything once she had fallen into her weaving during the sandstorm. It had been easier to do everything rather than only one thing. Bodies were very strange that way, interconnected in the most astounding ways, so she had simply fixed him. All of him. Now he dashed around like a happy Stryfa kid, clearly delighted, though he had not said a word about it. Instead, he spent his time and energy hauling this and that while chattering her ears off. Well, it would be a lie to say that she was truly annoyed. Baan hated hauling things. She didn't really enjoy activities like chopping wood or scrubbing floors. She absolutely hated washing out the rugs and beating them, because no matter how many times she did it, sand still got everywhere. In fact, those were chores she had never had to do before her exile. She had been a witch who sat in the shivuti. Her daily tasks had been to take the herbs that had been collected and prepare them for storage or use, and to make whatever mixtures were needed. She had stitched wounds, settled fevers, and delivered babies. The chief and his advisors had consulted her on matters of importance, and she had read oracle bones, blood, and guts. She had blessed hunters. She had kept curses from touching her tribe and had kept the people hale and whole. She had roamed and spoken with spirits, making and maintaining the contracts that made the desert livable. Baan had never had to haul her own water or scrub floors or beat rugs. She hated it now, and she would hate it forever. Lucios was delightfully useful. He didn't seem to mind manual labor at all. In the mornings he rose early, taking her axe and making his way up the narrow pathway carved into the cliff face and then down into the valley there to chop down the spindly, thorny but fast-growing akaikai trees for firewood. He always took his sword with him, so Baan suspected he was doing more than just chopping wood. If anything, he was likely practicing on his own, getting himself back in shape. Baan had been incensed the first time he'd disappeared, convinced he was going to tear something open and make a mess of himself. He hadn't, somehow, and now she was used to him bringing in wood every day. She had thought it was excessive, until she realized he was piling it up in a sheltered corner of the courtyard. She had been both touched and unnerved, knowing that he would soon be gone. The wound would likely not reopen now unless he did something very stupid, like lifting stone slabs by himself. Now it was a matter of regaining his strength and stamina so he could make the journey back. In the afternoons he checked her traps for whatever unlucky critter was destined for her dinner table. At first he had simply tagged along with her, but eventually he had started going on his own, freeing her up so she could go to the cave river to fish. Even better, he had remade them. Baan had never been a hunter, and she had recreated her traps from memory, imitating what Thuran had done during the long evenings when things were slow. She hadn't made them correctly, but Lucios seemed to know how to make proper ones. That had been quite profitable, and she was delighted with the amount of meat she had on her table these days. Even more unexpected was his interest in herblore. She had thought he had only been bored, but he was full of questions and enthusiasm even now. It was both pleasing and unexpected. Baan scrambled up the rocky trail, sweating already. The footpath was dangerously narrow, and she had to grip the various crevices in the rock wall to make it up to the plateau. The sun had yet to rise, which was exactly how she liked it. It would be stupidity to hunt for now the night bloom in the day. Lucios, she said, stay down there, the climb is difficult. It's not so bad. His blonde head appeared over the edge of the plateau, rising steadily as he followed the path. With a grunt, he hauled himself onto the flat rock face while Baan clicked her tongue. Stubborn. I am, he agreed. It's one of my better traits. Baan was rapidly becoming very proficient in Dolkoiri. Baan's habit of eavesdropping in the shape of a bird had not been in vain. She had absorbed a great deal of the language but had lacked the opportunity to practice. Now, with Lucios, she was able to practice to her heart's content. He was rather obliging. They had stopped keeping such a rigid practice schedule, and now often traded words when the opportunity arose. Oftentimes, he would point to a plant and tell her what it was in Dolkoiri, and Baan would do the same in Kavari. Sometimes he would get stuck, not knowing what something, usually an exotic, desert plant, was actually called at all, but Baan was generous enough to teach him herblore even if he wasn't trading for it. So, he was saying, night bloom, I'm guessing that it only blooms at night then? Yes. Baan was looking at the rock face, trying to find the telltale blue shimmer of the petals. The flower opens at night. After an hour or so, the flower makes, flower blood? The water changes. Inside, it goes into the leaves. The leaves make good, painkiller. We use it for childbirth. Very strong, but can be dangerous. Can be, stuck? Some patients do not stop taking night bloom. They become, stuck. Addicted? Like with dream seed? Yes. Addicted. Addicted. She practiced the new word, rolling it around in her mouth. And it's blue? Yes. Like this? He reached out above her head and stuck his fingers inside a crevasse. Rooting for something, he pulled it out, and Baan could see the blue glimmer of unfurled petals in the wan pre-dawn light. Yes. How many do you need? How many are there? Do not take them all. Need some later. She didn't want to strip this area of night bloom. That would be stupid. She did, however, want enough to take and trade. No Kavari trader would exchange goods with her unless she managed to pose as someone else, so she would have to go into a city. She knew a place or two in Kairos that would buy, provided the quality was good. Baan didn't have a clan or clansman anymore. She needed to buy what goods would have normally been produced. For that, she needed money. It was a pain. They gathered until the leather bags she had brought were full. Lucios took them from her on his way down, telling her she would probably be bowled over by the weight. Baan had not found it very funny, but it was true that the bags, small in Lucios' much bigger hands, were rather large in hers. If you fall and crack your head, I am not fixing you. She heard his laughter float up from somewhere below. He was nearly at the bottom. The man was fast, too. Baan smothered her smile and followed. This one? Lucios gently held out the leaves of a low-growing shrub. The flowers had come in and would only last for a week. The leaves looked like little needles, and the color was somewhere between green and brown. The flowers were not much better. They looked like little stars, dirt stars. Suk was a very ugly little plant. Yes. What does it do? Makes good tea. Oh, sometimes herblore wasn't very exciting. No effects? Some. Such as. Baan gave him a side eye, which he ignored. No effect for men. Useful for women. Lucios blinked. Baan could see it the instant he understood her meaning, because the back of his ears flushed red. Oh, he said again. Yes, it is gentle, but it must be used over a long time. It's very popular in Dolkoiri. Lady houses? Brothels? Maybe. Not sure. Nothing like that in a Savutiver. Baan wrinkled her nose. It was true. Buildings made only for prostitution were a city phenomenon. True, some Kavari engaged in trading sex for favors, but there was no vuti only for the buying and selling of sex, and there was no need for money inside a tribe. And what Kavari woman would have worked at such a place? There was always food and shelter, and orphans were raised by the tribe. They were simply unnecessary to the workings of a Kavari hold, and no Kavari woman would have stood for it. It would have been intensely insulting. No Kavari was ever made to live alone. Except exiles. Exiles were not Kavari anymore. Ba'an frowned, her mood spoiled by the thought. Ba'an? She glanced up at him. He had stopped picking and was looking at her with some concern. Is something wrong? No. Yes. Everything was wrong, but it was not his problem. The look he gave her made it clear he knew she was lying. Stupid clever man. She shrugged it off. Usually they pay very well for Kavari sukti. They did. It kept the women working and the babies to a minimum. The entire thing was repulsive, but wretched Dolkori customs were not Ba'an's problem, and she needed the coin to buy the things she could not make herself. Still, it was a wonder their women had not simply risen up and killed all their menfolk. It was so humiliating. For everyone, Ba'an would have never tolerated such a thing. Thuran had never dared to even look at another woman in front of Ba'an. That was the way things should be, though she knew the Dolkori often did things backwards. They enjoyed taking the natural order and destroying it. For fun, it seemed. They picked the flowers in silence for some time. Do you go into our cities often? When I have to. She frowned again. Ba'an did not like Dolkori cities. It was a long journey to the nearest one, and she had to go on foot because of the goods she carried. Sometimes there were bandits or thieves and she had to kill them. It was messy. On top of all that, the cities were dirty and noisy. Dolkori also thought Kavari were stupid savages, so they always tried to cheat her at least once or twice. Ba'an had spent a long time listening in on merchants as crows to figure out what everything was supposed to cost. It had incensed her when they had refused to buy for even a fraction of what her supplies were worth. Merchants were all cheats, she had learned, so she had started selling directly to whomever it was that needed whatever she was selling. But even then she never got what she thought she ought to have, and it was simply infuriating. They're not much to your liking, are they? She gave him a look. I will be polite and say nothing. He snorted in amusement, fingers still busy in the dirt even as he smiled. That's unusually generous of you. I am always generous. I put up with you. He burst out laughing. That's true. I take it all back and apologize profusely. I will think over your apology. Pick the rest yourself. I am hungry. Somehow, he managed to look both amused and slightly concerned at the same time. She ignored the look, shoving the satchels at him as she got up and stretched. It was true she'd had a snack not too long ago, but Ba'an was often hungry. The magic of her coat always pulled at her bones, regardless of whether she wore it or not, hollowing her out with hunger. She could not remember the last time she had felt truly full since she had donned it. Her stomach felt physically full, but she never felt satiated in the way that usually ought to feel. Only souls could do that. Do not forget to find Sambi Sahi too, she called over her shoulder as she left. She saw him raise an arm in an unfamiliar salute. Yes, Ba'an, whatever you say, Ba'an. Ba'an rolled her eyes. Insane. That's what he was. Insane. Why do you need all this, Sambi Sahi? They had amassed quite a lot over the course of the weeks he had been hale enough to help her. He stared at the pile that had grown to be nearly 3 full baskets. Are you really going to sell it all? He had a doubtful expression that said he didn't think they could carry it all, even if it was the two of them. Time had passed quickly. Lukios was likely well enough to make the journey to the nearest city any day now. It was only a matter of preparation, as Ba'an did not want the long journey to be a waste. She had goods to sell and buy. No. Ba'an stuck a steaming piece of white skoa fish into her mouth. It was delicious, even unsalted. The problem, of course, were the bones. She made a face and spat the piece that had been stabbing her out into the fire. The damn thing had bones everywhere. No matter how hard she tried, she could never get all the bones out before eating it. It drove her crazy, to the point that Thuran had always taken the bones out for her. For some reason, he'd always had an excellent eye for the thin, translucent spines embedded in the pale flesh. She scowled down at the rest of the fish lying innocently on her plate, seemingly free of offending spines. Let's switch. Lukios offered her his plate. The fish had been flayed open neatly and cut into strips. There were no obvious bones left in the white meat. Ba'an glanced at her own plate. Her fish had also been flayed open, though perhaps not so neatly. Definitely not that neatly. You're going to scare it to death a second time, Ba'an. Let's switch. She took his plate and gave him hers. She mumbled something into her lap. Sorry, I can't hear you, she mumbled again. What's that? He was grinning again. He knew exactly what she'd said. The little stit-tat. Ba-on felt very annoyed. I said, thank you. His grin broadened. Stop that. Your face will split open. He didn't. You're welcome, he said, very sweetly, and then started deboning her. Now his portion again. Okay, she had missed a few spines. The bones went plink 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 into the fire in a steady stream. More than a few spines. She stuck the perfectly deboned portion into her mouth without a sliver of shame. Well, he had good eyesight. Good for him. Ba-on cleared her throat. Half is for honey. He glanced up at her sudden proclamation. Honey? She nodded. Wasp honey. He looked puzzled. You're using the flowers for honey? She looked at him and shook her head. I'm not sure what you're saying. His brows had knit together into a frown. The corners of Ba-on's mouth lifted in a small, mysterious smile and Lucao's shifted in his seat. I'm not sure I like that look, he said, finally looking uncomfortable. I'm not going to like this at all, am I? Ba-on let her smile grow into her sunniest expression. Lucao's look of suspicion intensified. Do not worry, Lucao's, she said. It is very easy.